recording.
Welcome everybody to April's edition of the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour. Few years ago now, I was contacted by a gentleman that lives comparatively close to me by the name of Jurgen Ziewe. And Jurgen's initial concerns were quite interesting ones, in that he was worried that the cover of his book, his first book, Multidimensional Man, which is this one here, looked very, very like the cover of my first book. And I have to admit that there is a similarity there. But looking into this, you'll find that the symbolism of mirrors and people looking through mirrors and reflections is extremely common. The reason being that this seems to be very much a theme that people use when they're discussing such things as out-of-the-body experiences, near-death experiences, or anything where you're moving from one state of awareness to another state of awareness. Jurgen then very kindly sent me a copy of Multidimensional Man, and I found it absolutely wonderful. The reason I found it wonderful was because Jurgen writes in a very, very nice style of writing. It's very intimate, and he describes his own experiences in great detail. Now, Jurgen is very much, as he says himself, he's an explorer of alternate states. He's not somebody necessarily seeking out the answers or the reasons why we experience these, because he doesn't need to know this particularly, because he experiences them on a regular basis. Now, Jurgen and I have met up on 2 or 3 occasions now, and we always have fascinating conversations. And indeed, prior to this show, a couple of days ago, we had a chat on Skype. And it always goes extremely well, because he is just so knowledgeable in terms of altered states of consciousness and alternate places we can go. And also what is fascinating about Jurgen is that he is an incredibly good digital artist. So he unusually is able to bring back the images he sees in altered states of consciousness and then depict them for us so we can see them. Now, what I'd like to do is, firstly, to just introduce Jurgen. So, Jurgen, very much great to have you on the show.
Hi, Tony. Nice to speak to you again.
And you. Right, so what we'll do is, what I always find with Jurgen is we can just spin off into ideas and everything else really easily, so that's why I'm particularly looking forward to this show. But what I'd like to do a little bit, so the listeners and the viewers and everybody else in the background there can know a little bit about you, Jurgen. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came into this ability to move into altered states of consciousness?
Yes, I think that's a really long story, so I try to keep it as short as possible. Quite early on in my life, in the 70s, I became interested in meditation, and it was nothing more than some friend of mine. When I told him I was going through a depression, he suggested I should try meditation, and I did. I went to transcendental meditation seminars, and then I've got really interested in the whole subject of it. And so I started reading books about it and so on. And then I was fascinated by all these enlightened masters and beings, and I was interested in the Indian philosophy and tradition. So I started regular meditating, and then got deeper and deeper into it. And in the end, I thought I want to be one of these guys who know all the answers. I was quite naive, really. So I started meditating as if there was no tomorrow. I was meditating about 5 hours every morning, and I did that for 6 months. And after 6 months, I noticed that I became more stressed, more aggressive, and it had the absolute opposite of what I actually set out to achieve. And so I thought that was a really bad idea. So I thought, okay, that didn't work. I just go back to my normal hedonist student life and leave it at that. But then something really incredible happened. Out of the blue, I was having coffee, and one morning I suddenly had this dissociation. I couldn't somehow link my awareness or my hands to myself. I couldn't figure out who they belonged to. So, and this went further. I suddenly realized that my body was an alien thing. I couldn't relate to it. And before I knew, I suddenly lost all identification with my physical body and myself. I had no idea what was going on. And
just quickly, what was the circumstances you were in when this happened? Were you with friends? Were you on your own? Or
no, I was having breakfast. I made myself a really strong cup of coffee and a really sort of doorstep sandwich, and I was just tugging into it, and suddenly I looked at it and I thought, who does this belong to? Why am I holding this? There was a total dissociation to what I was actually doing. And this escalated to such an extent that I lost the whole complete sense of identity. And before I knew, I was gripped by an incredible ecstasy. And the whole room changed. It became all light. And before I knew it, I was standing in this incredible light, and then I had this incredible feeling of clarity and truth, and it's almost impossible to describe, but it was a feeling of intense clarity, And this lasted for about half an hour, and I gradually sort of came back into my body, but my world had totally changed after that. I was walking around in this dissociated state for about a couple of weeks in an incredible state of peace and contentment. I felt there was no outside world. Wherever I looked, that was just me, because my identity had shifted from this personal thing to everything I saw in my environment. And I accepted that. It was an incredibly nice feeling, and then it faded away. But after that, shortly after that, it started off as lucid dreams. I became aware in my dreams. And then one day, out of the blue, I was married then. We lived in a small town in Germany, and out of the blue, suddenly I found myself standing in front of my parents' house, my mother's house, and I was in full awareness, and the curious thing was I had a 360-degree vision, and I was fully awake, and I couldn't figure out what was happening. And it was only when I looked down on the ground that I suddenly saw something resembling my body appearing before my eyes. And I had no idea what had taken place, and I looked around, I looked at all the details in my environment, the tree in the garden, I saw every blade of grass absolutely crystal clear. I was fully awake. There was no doubt about it that I was in my hometown, in front of my mother's house. And this confusion sort of raged through me, and my first thought was, how do I get back? How do I get back? I knew very well that I shouldn't have been here. I should have been in my bed, 80 miles away. And I thought, what do I do? What do I do? Do I take a bus? Or, I had no concept at all of what was taking place. And with this thought, I suddenly zoomed back into my body. And then the trouble started, because the first thing I woke up my wife, I said, I've just been to Fürstenau, my hometown, and Julia was a bit sleepy. Said, go back to sleep, you had a dream, No, and so I started, but she wouldn't buy it, and then I took off to the library the next day, and I tried to look at all sorts of subjects. One was, the first I started off with medical conditions. I thought I may have had a brain seizure or something very, very strange has happened, And so I spent most of the day until I gradually eased my way from the medical section through the psychology section, which was right next to it. And next to the psychology section was parapsychology. And there I found a book which was called Doppelgängers. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. So I started reading it, and that was the first clue I had that there may have been something supernatural. But you have to bear in mind, up until that time, I didn't believe in any of that. To me, if people talked about ghosts or anything like that, I just thought they were nuts, slightly silly, really, and superstitious, and all this sort of thing. It didn't mean anything to me. Even when I was meditating, I dismissed anything like that, anything occult, as simply nonsense, And this sort of got my attention going, and then also after that, because there was very little, it was 1973, 1973, 1974, there was very little written about it, especially not in the German language, and there was very little I could actually find out about it. But then a friend of mine who I mentioned to, he mentioned Carlos Castaneda. And then I read a book by Castaneda, which was called A Separate Reality. And that was the first time I found out that, yes, there is such a thing as an out-of-body experience. And then I became really interested in this subject. But it was not until we moved to England that I really started pursuing it. And then I started having regular out-of-body experience, which came quite easy at the time. And that went on and on and on for many years after that. So that's...
Okay. There's 2 or 3 points there that I'm really, really interested in. The 360 vision is something I've come across a great deal, particularly with individuals who take mind-altering drugs such as dimethyltryptamine and other things as well. And it's one of the things they say is it seems that you have this complete awareness of everything that's going on around you, and everything is really vivid in the way that you see it. I was also intrigued that you found yourself somewhere else that was part of this reality, but not finding yourself in front of your mother's house. And I'm fascinated by your reaction, which I've heard many times before of, this is so real. Now, when you're in a dream scenario, we don't ever think this. We don't ever are self-aware enough to think, how am I going to get back to where I am located? Because in dreams, we just readily accept the fact that we're in these scenarios. So clearly, this is something that's hyper-lucidity. You were aware that you were Jurgen in this place that was not the place you should be, and how you got back. But I'm very interested in the point you make about the doppelganger idea and the idea of doppelgangers, because we know from parapsychology and from normal psychology that there is a thing called hoitoscopy and autoscopy, whereby you can see your own image in front of you in some way. Now, again, this is related to disassociation, which again is very much one of the points you were making, weren't you? That you had a build-up to it, whereby you felt that there was this sudden strangeness about your body and being in your body, and the disassociation of your hands, and realizing there was something more curious going on. So clearly this initially was something that happened spontaneously.
Yes.
You were then suggesting that as time went on, you started to develop an ability to do this slightly more controlled. Can you explain the process by which that then took place? Because I'm sure an awful lot of the listeners and the people watching us out there would love to be able to know how that comes about, how you can suddenly start to make and control it slightly more. So please carry on with the narrative of how you went on, and talk as long as you like, Jurgen, because I think it's how you explain this. It's not me who want to listen to it, it's to you. Okay?
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think the first experience is sort of mystic experience, for want of a better word, where I had this dissociation from my body and suddenly entered this pure state of consciousness. I think that was actually the thing that disrupted my cohesiveness, my identification with my physical body. I think that sort of triggered it all off, and there was no way. It was almost as if it destroyed the the connection, the normal conditioning. Okay, and after that, my mind was almost set free, and I think as a direct response to that, these out-of-body experiences started happening, coming very easy. And after I took a really great interest in it, I found it. I only needed to want it. That I had the ability to project out of my body, but I still couldn't actually find out a method where I say A leads to B and B leads to C. It always seemed to happen spontaneously. And sometimes when I least expected it, either in the morning, after I went back to sleep, or in the middle of the night, But at other times, I tried to really sit down for an hour or so and will myself out of the body, and that usually was unsuccessful. It was only when I didn't have any intent, it happened then spontaneously, almost by itself. And I started recording all these things because to me that was absolutely new. I then, in the meantime, we lived in England. I found a lot more literature. Robert Muldoon, I think Sylvian Muldoon, one of these people, it's a long time ago. I think Edward Fox is another one of the early people who had written about it. And then much later I found a book by Robert Monroe, and Robert Monroe was the most detailed description, and a lot of the things he wrote about I found they were also applicable to me, And so I had these experiences, and what I did is I kept a record of it, a very detailed record, and just put them in my diary and then left them there. And they remained there for about 30 years. I didn't really talk to people about it because whenever I started talking about it, I got funny looks, and in those days you wouldn't talk about it. There was no internet. That was just an aberration. So, even my best friends didn't really know about it because I shut up soon. And then only about in 2008, my daughter found all these diaries I had written, and she said, "What is this?" I said, "Well, these are all my out-of-body experience. I've kept a diary." And she suggested I should type it out because she could read it, because she couldn't read my handwriting. So I started typing them all out, and as I read through those, you have to bear in mind, once I had written those, I never really looked at them again. And so for the first time in 30 years, I started reading them, and I thought, "Oh, blimey, that's really interesting stuff here, And I started typing it all, and suddenly I saw there was a narrative which was going right through it, and lots of things happened in the time. For example, there was a period which lasted for about 6 months where I met, when I was out of my body, a Chinese master, a very, very spiritual, powerful personage. And he actually trained me. He started off by giving me riddles, and he poked fun at me, and put me through all sorts of kinds of tests and things, which I then recorded in the book Multidimensional Man. Finally, after about 6 months, the training was very interesting because in the end, we started using not words or thoughts, which is the usual thing. You communicate simply by knowing on those sort of types of levels. You don't have to actually verbalize things. It's almost like a thought transference. But then he started using images and symbols. And I soon discovered that these symbols were like a language belonging to a higher state of consciousness, And it was, and whenever he communicated these symbols to me, attached to them was always like a vision of something, a scenery, a knowing of something which I knew about, but I had no recent connection to, And then came an episode in out-of-body experience where I was introduced into these much, much higher states of consciousness. And that was in the intensity, it was very much in the same league as the first one, which set all this off, So after that, I kept recording, I kept making excursions into that. I saw myself very much like a reporter, What I experienced, I wrote down. I found better ways of retaining the information. I found better ways of recall, and also all the time I was doing that, I kept up my meditation practice. So I could, my focus became very good, and my awareness, my attention, so I could prolong these out-of-body experiences simply by keeping my attention focused on the place where I was. And I also was able to bring more details with me and sort of impress them on my physical brain, because the thing is, it very, very much works like when you wake up in the morning and you had a dream, okay, you may just, the first few seconds, you may still remember it, and then a few seconds later, you just have fragments, and then after about 5 minutes, it's all gone. You know you had a dream, but you just haven't got the connection anymore. And I made sure that because I wasn't dreaming, because I was fully aware, before I went back into my body, I would simply impress my physical brain with what just happened. So before I even got into my body, or before I opened my eyes, I went through the whole scenario again, but I had the full visual content with me rather than remembering. I was living through it again in a way, because it was still much more vivid this way. And then as soon as I went back into my body, I woke up, I just kept my eyes shut, and I just ran through it again, and that created the recall in the physical brain. Now that became so potent and so powerful that even weeks later I could make the connection and actually remembered further details. The best comparison you could make, let's say you've got a house in France or something and you visit it once a year, and you get to know the place, and when you come back, you find it quite easy to recall where where the kitchen kettle was and other details, So basically you create a mental space of your property, let's say your house in France, but you can then go back and tap into the memory and get further details. Okay, maybe you just haven't made a conscious effort. And this, my recall worked very much on the same basis. So when I went to a certain place like now, and I look back at a scene where I visited a family which I've written about in my second book, Vistas of Infinity, I can still see the sitting room right in front of me, as if it was, that one. As if it was my own sitting room. I can still go back in there and I can see there's a table, there's a sofa. I remember the three women, one was at the other side of the room. So these memories are just as vivid as any physical memory you have. For example, if I think back of the place where I lived before, I can still visualize the place, So this reality is exactly like a physical reality, because you experience it in full waking consciousness. I think that is really important. And over the years, I simply had to accept that the reality we live in here at the moment is only one of many realities, and we can actually access other realities simply by shifting our awareness, shifting our attention.
One of the major reasons that we consider this reality to be the reality is because it's consensual, and because the things we experience in this reality, you go to bed at night and the bedroom is in a particular shape and a particular configuration, and when you wake up in the morning, the bedroom is in the same configuration. And also that you can share experiences with other individuals within this universe, and you will agree with what you've seen. Now, what you're saying here is that you can reproduce that in the out-of-body experience, in the sense that you can actually go back to a location that has the same integrity that it had before. I mean, I was particularly interested, with the going back to the ladies, and they're in the same position as if you've absented yourself from that part of reality and gone into another timeless place, which is this one, to be able to then go back into the reality again, back into the alternate reality at the point you left it. Now, this reminds me very much... Sorry, yes, go on.
Yeah, no, that's only a recall. I was just trying to express the recall is just as vivid as if I were to recall a physical memory. I mean, I don't even know whether these three ladies would still be there, but I mean, the recall is just as vivid as the recall from a physical experience, So I can't make a qualitative difference between the out-of-body experience in a separate reality, between that and our physical reality. To me, these realities are just as valid, But there are multiple levels of reality and realities, and I try to explore these in both of my books, which are linked to states of consciousness, and so there are literally infinite types of realities, whereas we have a physical reality here, which you mentioned is a consensus reality where we all agree on and we can have shared experiences, but there are equal numbers of consensus realities which are non-physical, which people can also share, and they usually share them by being on the same wavelengths, if you like, So if you have people, for example, who are interested in certain things like dancing and arts and things, they will meet other people who are on the same wavelengths, and they will have created an environment which aligns itself with their tastes and with their likes and preferences, And these realities are literally infinite. You can have anything from very dark and sinister realities which people share because of their negative mindsets to very sublime and beautiful, elevated realities which people also share, because of their mindsets. And that's really interesting because, we just happen to be in an environment here which happens to have a certain configuration of, let's say, atoms working, atoms or energy is configured in a certain way which makes it physical. But beyond that, there are lots of other energy configurations which may be on a different level or on a different vibratory rate, which makes them just as real when you are on that level, And that's what I found. So I couldn't say, I could no longer say, okay, what we experience here, that is the only reality. Everything else is just in the mind. It's just made up. That doesn't work anymore because it doesn't convince. It wouldn't convince me that is so, because it's like convincing somebody who is sitting next to me and say, hey, hang on a minute, that's not reality here. You are just thinking it is, It's impossible to not accept this anymore when you have this total experience.
Well, I think that's... I was going to say, we'll come back to the levels of reality. The one thing, because I'd like to really focus in on that later on in the discussion, the one thing that I really would like to focus in on, you mentioned about the Chinese master that worked with you. Did you ever find out anything about his motivations, who he was, what his background was, or anything about him? Because he seems to be investing a great deal of time in helping you. So I'd like to know a little bit about, did you ever learn anything about him as a person?
Yes, I did. When I first met him, the first feeling was that I knew this guy, and I knew him quite well. It was almost as if he was an old friend, but we lost contact. And whereas he was in a state of consciousness which was quite elevated, quite powerful, he had an incredible charisma. He was a very laid-back chap. He had a great sense of humor. He was not like some dream figure. He was a total sovereign, independent individual, this personality and character. My feeling was that I knew this chap, but I had forgotten. And he, almost as if we were friends, equals, in a way. But his authority, his energy was much more potent, much more powerful, and he then demonstrated it by introducing me into these higher levels of consciousness, And the thing was, he wasn't responding in a way you would normally. People. For example, when I first met him, he wasn't standing or sitting, he was just lying casually on his side. And then I talked to him, and I was overawed by his presence. And then I thought, oh, he is a great spiritual master, So instinctively, I sort of bowed down to show my sort of reverence, and he kicked me away with his foot, saying, "Can you imagine how silly you look if somebody walked past and saw you like this, And he was always sort of poking fun and always slightly sending me up. But we created this bond, and which enabled which enabled me to pick up a lot more knowledge and information. And he would give me tests, He said things like, there was a door I had to go through, and intermittently there were spears coming into the door, and if I got it wrong, it would sort of kill me or something like that. And all these sort of little tests he would invent for me, and I had to find the right mental attitude to solve these tests, and they went on for months. And until he felt, I think, it was right for me to take it a step further. Before I actually met him, I had so many out-of-body experiences that I became almost a little bit blasé about it. It was, and I felt I didn't really progress much. It was like being here, but in a non-physical reality, and nothing really much interesting happened. I wanted to go further. I knew there were much higher levels, much more interesting levels, and it was out of this frustration that I called out for some help, that he made an appearance, and that was all sort of happening in the 70s into the 80s, early 80s. And then, of course, I had a very long break because I had a family, but I still meditated. I still had out-of-body experiences, but I didn't record them anymore. I didn't enter them in a book. I sort of lost interest. I was building up a career as an artist, and illustrator at the time. And it came back again sort of in the 2000s after the kids had left home, and I had more time to devote to my spiritual thing, that I got back into this mindset.
Okay, so the billion-dollar question, which is the question I always ask under these circumstances, and we have discussed it many times privately over coffee and everything else. What is the difference between what you consider to be an out-of-body experience to lucid dreaming, or are they elements of the same phenomenon?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I always felt lucid dreaming. I had lucid dreams before I had my first out-of-body experience. I found them very curious, and I thought, they were beautiful, very vivid, incredibly realistic dreams. And the fascinating thing was, I was aware that I was dreaming, but then I didn't pay any more attention to them other than there being a special sort of dream, you know. Now, I still have lucid dreams and out-of-body experience, but I started learning that you can actually use the lucid dreams and turn them into an out-of-body experience. And the way I did that, my definition of a lucid dream is basically simply a dream in which you are aware. And the content the lucid dream takes is usually taken from the subconscious. You know, it's your own personal field, and it has its own narrative. You know, so very often in a lucid dream there is some narrative attached to it. It appears to me there's some sort of story. Something happening. There are a group of people, they talk to you, and something happens. And I find the content of these lucid dreams is primarily taken from your own individual personal subconscious, you know, and it's then fleshed out. And I don't think anybody else is participating in it. It's just your own private world. And therefore, because of this, you become incredibly powerful in it. You can do almost anything. Your creative abilities are unlimited, you know. Whereas when you're in an out-of-body state, you are limited. You haven't got infinite power. You are limited by the state of mind you're in and the energy you carry with you. You know, for example, I noticed in an out-of-body state, I sometimes found it very hard to fly, you know, almost as if I was way down, whereas in a lucid dream, the world is your oyster. You can do anything, you know. Whereas in an out-of-body state, you are your energy is determined by your mindset. For example, I found if I really wanted to fly, I had to have much more positive thoughts, you know, and then that had a direct impact on my levitation. You know, sometimes I found it even hard to move a few feet, you know, and I noticed that when I elevated my energy, that I suddenly could shoot off. Also, then you attract people. For example, I remember one time when I shouted, "Give me some help," you know, and suddenly somebody came from behind me and gave me a mighty push and flung me up into the air, and I heard people giggling, you know. So there were people who I attracted. They had a little bit of fun seeing me sort of flapping away, trying to get some lift, and stuff like that happens. And when I say the difference between the two is the lack of narrative, there is no narrative. You go from A to B very much in the way you would go from A to B here in physical life. Let's say you go to the shops, you know, there's no narrative, there's no story, you just do the things you do. And in an out-of-body experience, you do the same thing. You are in an alternative reality, and there's no story. You're just doing things, you meet people, you talk to them, and I find my main occupation during these out-of-body states, I learned to talk to people and interview them and find out what it's all about. And I discovered very soon, because of the enhanced level of communication, when I started to talk to people, not only was I privy to what they were saying, but I suddenly had insight and participated in everything they experienced. So if somebody said, "Oh, I used to be a lorry driver," then I was sitting next to him on his lorry as he was driving around in it, and I knew the make of the model, the color, you know, where he was driving and so on. So I had the whole picture. And that's why I found it very a great information source, rather than looking around and see, oh, well, what's there? There's a tree there and there's such and such. I found I had much more access to the reality of these realms by talking to people, because they would take me onto their own journeys, and they provided like sort of insights into this reality. And so that became a great source of my information I gained from this by interviewing people. And in Business of Infinity, I wrote stories about, there was one story where I met a waiter in a hotel on the next level. You have to bear in mind that everything that exists here also exists there. You know.
By the way, Jurgen, I absolutely love the waiter story. He was called Kay, wasn't he, as I remember?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, tell this one. It is fantastic. It's really, and the way you describe it in the book is incredible. But please continue.
Yes, that was an interesting story because I went to this place which was like a super-duper holiday resort. And it was thronged with people, a bit like when you go to Venice in high season. The streets are crowded and everything, and everybody was having a really great time. And it was a really beautiful, incredibly interesting, diverse and rich place. So I went on this tour through the crowds, watched all the sideshows and everything. I took a great interest. My awareness was totally established there. There was no danger that I would wake up because the focus was totally anchored in this reality. And that is another thing really, because sometimes I felt I was so heavily rooted in this alternate reality that on occasion I even wondered whether I had actually died, you know, and wondered whether, you know, how I'm going to get back, you know. And later I just didn't worry about it anymore because it inevitably happened. But this was one of these occasions where I really took my time and wandered around in this. And I noticed the places, the hotel where I started off was full of people, waiters. And I thought, why on earth would anybody become a waiter and serve other people when they had all the freedom in the world to do what everybody else does, you know? And then when I talked to the lady, she said, well, you know, there are people here who need to learn the principle of service, you know. Mostly the people here who are serving people, who are waiters, they have no knowledge of what it's like to help other people, to be their fathers, and they're just selfish people, you know. And she then suggested I should talk to Kay, who was leaning on the wall there, you know, with a white waiter's jacket. And I went over to him and I talked to him, and the moment I saw him, I could see right through him, and I saw that he was quite I saw like a hideous being behind him, and he became instantly aware, you know, and he said, I'm sorry, you know, normally I can hide my past, but you obviously can see through me. And then he started telling me that he was a really evil bastard in his past, you know. And he started then telling me his life. And as he was telling me, he literally transported me into his world. And I walked along with him. And it's not, you have to bear in mind, it's not that you have a linear story that you follow like in a movie here. You know, which has a beginning and you go through the movie and 2 hours later the film is over and you wake up. It's not like that. You have a knowingness. It's almost as if you have the whole scene sort of happening all at once, you know, and you can, it's knowing instead of following a linear thinking process. And that's the thing which I also talked about. When you get into much higher states of consciousness, your thinking simply changes. You're no longer a linear thinker. You know, you are a lateral thinker. Your thinking happens simultaneously on many different levels. So you end up with knowledge, a knowledge building which you then need to translate into linear language in order to communicate it on this level. But when you're on a higher dimensional level or higher state of consciousness, this linearity, this linear narrative does not apply anymore. You know, you just know and I talked about K, I knew his helper, he who came to his rescue, and although there seemed to be a considerable time which he needed to get out of these very lower dimensional levels into the higher dimensional levels, I could see the whole story and had it in one big chunk and one picture, and it probably only took a few seconds to know his whole story. And then I had to go back and write it down in a linear fashion to communicate it. And this is very often what takes place, especially when you go into much higher states of consciousness. You become aware of mechanics which we, on this level, on this gross physical level, we just have no concept of. Just to give you an example, there is the everything we see has got a sound component. Everything we smell has got a visual component. All the senses have got additional components to it. So you can hear a color, you can hear a shape, you can see a sound. There is a much greater spectrum of perception than we have here. And it doesn't stop there. Attached to this incredibly enhanced perception is also an incredibly enhanced greater awareness. It's what is very often described as cosmic consciousness. It's a much greater awareness which you simply cannot translate into the linear workings of normal brain activity, because we live in a time zone, where things progress to one event after another in a sequence. This doesn't apply on those states of consciousness. Everything is on a cosmic level. And it's quite pointless to actually try to describe it. If you consider, for example, try to describe to a blind person the color white, where would you begin? What words would you try to use, to describe that? And it's a bit like that. So you're continuously thrown back to using metaphors and trying to bridge the gaps between what our normal understanding, how it can relate to. But when you actually experience it, you would probably say, oh, well, that's what Jurgen said is a lot of nonsense. That's on a totally different level what I experience it. And yet, I can't help, I feel I need to somehow report these things, because that is actually the greater potential of human beings. I feel that is the next level of our evolution. That is where we are aiming for as a species. That we are progressing from these limitations we've set ourselves, or the biological engines we've determined. And I think we're just beginning to transcend the steps. And that's a totally new story. And I think that's actually happening right now. We are just beginning to see, that the world is, it's not limited in terms of what the science is delivering almost on a day-to-day basis. It's just mind-boggling. And the same when people, more and more people report sort of what is termed as an awakening experience. That may well be because people are better at communicating. They are more. We are a social species. So if one person says something, then the other person, because we are akin, picks up on these vibrations, picks up on this energy, and they suddenly have a similar experience, And because of the communications through the internet, this has accelerated our learning capacity and our communication, and suddenly people share these transcendence into higher states of consciousness, and more people become aware of it. And that's, I think, to me, this is just the beginning of a new cycle of our human evolution. And that's where we're very excited.
I think that's where we move on for the final section, really. We've got about 10 minutes left. Now, one of the things that you and I discussed when we last met up in Brighton, it was a fascinating conversation. And some of the work you're now doing using virtual reality, things like the Oculus Plus, Oculus Rift, various other things, plus your personal talents as a digital artist, you're doing now some very, very exciting things. And I wonder if you're willing to share with us for the last 10 minutes or so the kind of things that you're now taking forward, because I know personally I'm very excited about the things you're trying to do, and I'm sure the audience will be fascinated as well.
Yes, that's right. I'm an illustrator and an artist, and I always found what's the best way to communicate what I've experienced. I thought the most easiest way or the most natural way was to do pictures, and I happen to have the tools, which makes it much more easy these days to create representations of what I've experienced. So I started turning out some pictures, although they are not 100% literal, but they're sort of pointing in the right direction of what I've experienced. And then lately, because of virtual reality, it's the next step that's coming along. I thought, how can I give people the feeling of what it's like to go through a tunnel without staring at a flat two-dimensional screen? And of course, virtual reality allows you to be immersed in it. So I created an app which is called Celestial Song, where you put this headset on, and then you are in the space, which is not physical space, but which is a very mental space, and you zoom through it, and I use the sounds of a composer friend of mine who based his music on ancient mantras, and it just draws you into this. And the idea is, what I'm trying to achieve is to make a connection between what people see and some long-forgotten archetype, which they may have experienced in the past but have no recollection of, So I'm hoping that suddenly the link becomes active, and they say, oh yes, I remember that. That is, happened to me, and I had good feedback from people who were very reminded, of something that was very real, and so the next stage is, virtual reality in itself is going to be the biggest breakthrough in technology, and it will have the biggest impact, bigger than television, than the internet, than the mobile phone. It will be huge. It will change consciousness on a global level, But I also want to use this technology in a creative way. So instead of people consuming content which designers and programmers provide them with, I would like to create content which triggers in people an out-of-body experience, by somehow giving clues or incubating lucid dream content, So when they watch this virtual reality, when they enter this virtual reality, which is peppered with clues like, are you dreaming? Then they can, hopefully, they start dreaming, and then they suddenly hear the voice in their dream, are you dreaming, which in lucid dreamers is very often a clue to become lucid in their dream. And these types of techniques, I'm still working on it. What is the best content to use in order to plant these words in the application, so that people, when they actually experience it, they will remember it and take it over to their dream. And I felt probably some content that activates the emotion, but I wanted to be positive. When you have, for example, watch a horror film late at night, you can't sleep or you have horrible dreams. I want to create content which gives people positive, good dreams, and then implant these so they can instantly become aware of a higher lucid level. And then the next stage is how to convert, once they're lucid, how to convert the lucidity into an out-of-body experience. And this is very much what I'm working on at the moment and what I want to exploit, really. So, yeah.
Well, I for one, am very, very keen to see more of this because a couple of days ago I bought a very cheap and cheerful virtual reality headset that can work with your phone. And I've downloaded 2 or 3 of the effects, and I found it quite stunning, absolutely quite stunning. It's quite disturbing because it brings home to you just exactly how your senses process information. And if I know that you'll know about this, Jurgen, but if you go onto the web and you look up on YouTube any of the videos on Oculus Prime, and the things that how people react as much as anything else to these states of consciousness, which effectively they are, effectively this is how we perceive reality. People jump out of their skin, Yes. And I think as a tool, that's going to be absolutely fantastic for you. Now, we're getting towards the end. One final question I'd like to ask you, which I think probably an awful lot of individuals want to ask. We've got about 5 minutes. If you could just very quickly just explain, what have you discovered so far? You've discussed about getting into your outer body, lucid dreaming, out-of-the-body experiences, and different levels of reality. How far do you think you can go within these kind of nested realities? And where do they ultimately lead?
Yes, that's a good question. I think I always feel I've only scratched the surface, and I think it's literally an infinite. The higher or the more I see or find, the more I realize how little I actually know and how much there is to it, and it's a humbling experience when you get into these states. You know so little, and there's so much more, and I feel I'm only just at the very beginning of it. It will take me more than a lifetime. My dream is when I've sort of put this physical body down eventually, I think my work will really start then. I want to become an explorer. Hopefully others will then join me, and maybe we both can go on a trip together and carry on our discussions, while being in this incredible virtual environment. Yeah, and explore. It's difficult when you have a physical body. And there's a reason why we have these bodies. There are certain types of information which we have to assimilate, and we have to work with. But what we experience is only the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more, And when people are getting prepared, when they had a glimpse in it, I think the positive thing of it is that when you actually die, you won't experience a death. You will just experience a new level of consciousness, And that's the greatest thing, because when since I had this experience, there's no fear of death. In fact, when I, quite a few years ago, it's a long time ago now, I was diagnosed with cancer, and there was no fear. I had no fear. I wasn't afraid of what I may go through, of impending death. And in that year, 2 of my friends died of the same cancer I was diagnosed with. Fortunately, with me, it was the early stages, and I totally rid my body of it. But that was a very important experience for me, because also, not only did it give me the confirmation that there is no death and there's no fear, because there is no outside world. Everything is consciousness. There's nowhere you can get lost in, or there's nothing you can lose. not even your life, because consciousness is an infinite continuum, and whether your attention is focused on this physical shape is neither here nor there. Consciousness can focus anywhere, where you place your attention. So the idea of a physical death totally loses its significance, and that's why I think, every day we wake up, we are just at the beginning of an infinite future. No matter how old you are, you're only just at the beginning, okay? And whatever it is, your reality is going to open up infinitely, and there's always infinite joy to be had, an infinite adventure is just waiting in the wings. And this sort of awareness makes everything you experience here on this level infinitely meaningful and gives significance to it and releases your creativity. That's how I look at it.
What a final way to sort of finish an interview with that incredible speech of optimism. I mean, that was absolutely amazing, Jurgen. That was absolutely fantastic. Right, very, very quickly, we're into our last minute now. So if you can very quickly let everybody know where they can get in contact with you, what your books, your website, and everything else, because your website is fantastic. It's just wonderful in terms of information there. So if you can give them those details, that would be really great.
Yes, I think the easiest way is just to Google my name, because there are only very few Ziewes. There's just my brothers and me, and you will find there are links to my website, which is lightandmagic.co.uk, which is my virtual reality website. And then there is Multidimensional Man, which deals with the levels of consciousness, which deals mainly with my book, and where I describe everything which I've written in my book. And I have neglected it a little bit because of my other work. But whenever I publish a book, and I have Vistas of Infinity is the latest one, people can also contact me on Facebook, by befriending me. Unfortunately, I get quite a few emails, and I try to answer them. Sometimes I get whole catalogs of questions, and it takes just so much time. So I've got a backlog at the moment going back to January of emails, which I'm trying to answer. But I always like to read about people, what they are up to. I've also created a soundtrack, which is a meditation soundtrack, which I brought back or was inspired when I had an out-of-body experience, which is based on the Om. And this soundtrack has now been downloaded well over 2 million times, and I get a lot of positive feedback. Again, the people can just download it, it's free. And the application, Celestial Song, is also free. People can go to my website. When they have got an Oculus Rift, they can simply download it and can experience it. I'm trying to make these things as accessible as possible, so I don't, it's not a business. I don't believe in this sort of turning it into some sort of commercial thing. It's just there, and I think it's got to be shared. People need to be aware and have access to these experiences. So I'm hoping I can carry on doing this sort of thing and be a facilitator in some way without,
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Jurgen. That was fascinating. Again, we must have you back for the show because, again, I know from reading your books that we have just scratched the surface in the terms that of what you've experienced. We haven't really touched life after death and a lot of the other areas and the NDE and the other issues that you discuss as well. So we will have you back as a future guest. Right, everybody, thanks again for listening in. Next month, my guest is going to be a lady called Susan Leyburn. And Susan is a fascinating lady in the sense that she is an incredibly talented medium. Now, my opinion about mediumship is a little bit up and down in terms of this, but Susan is somebody who is really doing the business and everything else, and she's doing it from a scientific point of view as well. She's recently embarked upon a PhD program. She's going to be a superb guest as well, as everybody else is. As always, my thanks to my guest Jurgen Ziewe today. Also, as always, thanks to Radia Nunez over there in Denver for facilitating this show, because without Radia this could not work. Okay, thanks everybody, and we'll be in contact, and I look forward to seeing you in a few weeks, in a period of time. This will be up probably in a week or 10 days time, and be able to be downloaded. But then again, you will have already downloaded it in the first place. Okay, thank you very much. And anybody, again, if they want to contact Jurgen on Facebook as well, Jurgen is a Facebook friend of mine as well. So we're all actually working together to change the paradigm. Okay, thank you very much, and I'll speak to you all again in a month's time. Thank you. Thanks, Jurgen.
Yeah, thank you, Tony.